let's explore some of the thought processes, some of the guidance for how to zero in on an area of identity, a pattern of, the part of the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is a good target for an upgrade. So, the first thing to understand is that reality and identity are too big for the conscious mind to tackle at any given moment, right? So the conscious mind is small, reality is big, and so the mapping or guidance is about where to direct the flashlight, where to look to see if an area of identity is a good candidate for an upgrade. So I think one thing to look at is that you want to have at least a 3x upgrade, right? Because reality is so big, identity is so big, that if you can't get a threefold increase, it's probably not, well, it's certainly not going to be, if you kind of think of the 80-20 principle, where 20% of your activity gives you 80% of your benefit and 20% of your activity gives you 80% of your problems. Now, that's a good thing to focus on, right? And I think the place to start would be what 20% of your activity is causing 80% of your unnecessary suffering in your reality. So what are the patterns? And the patterns are important. A stray thought, a stray feeling, a stray action, it's not going to have much impact. What has impact is the things that are going on constantly in the background. So you want to find a pattern, not just a one-off, like this would be a one-off. You don't want to focus on one-offs. You want to focus on the patterns. And of all the different patterns, right? Of all the different patterns in there, you want to find the patterns that are causing 80% of your suffering. So that takes a little bit of work, right? Because it's so close, it's hard to see. But we can find suffering, like if we do a little exercise right now, we can find suffering. Like I can locate my suffering through the body in a shallow breath pattern. That's one of my patterns. And also right here, tension here and tension here. So the emotion is fear, the tightnesses are here, the breath is shallow, right? So then the question is, where does that emerge from? Where's that particular pattern of physiology coming from? And the image, the feeling is going like this. And I know it's a young age. It's a young age. So it's an early childhood trauma. And if I look at this physiology, I feel a sense of stillborn. I see an image of the womb. So this is telling me that this is going on in the womb as a starting point. I have a little bit of mental data. My mother said she fell off her bicycle and landed on me while we were in the womb. I know that my mother and father were dysregulated, meaning they had their own undiagnosed, unintegrated traumas. So the chemicals of those, and so I can see images of shouting, images of screaming, and, just my mother being out of it, right? Not having a grasp or a container for herself, just being in extreme reactivity. And, the archetype of that is I see her grabbing a bread knife and screaming at my father. And the chemicals, the tensions that produces in the body, the alerts, of just kind of overwhelming, dissociation. Like that's a pretty big, energy. And so that's going on. And, just very small, very still. Now, this takes us into an awareness, right? Because following the 80-20 principle, going into childhood and birth-related trauma is where it's at. Stan Grof's work on prenatal and perinatal trauma seems to be the source, the original pattern where many of our greatest destructive patterns begin, right? And, so you can check out that, that area of work. But this also goes into like, I want to go to sleep now. I don't want to talk. So what was that? Well, first of all, it's a first for me, but I trust the body, I trust the psyche, and that was body and psyche led, number one. Number two. Number three, I come out of that feeling lighter, right? Not bad, right? Spend a few minutes, try to understand something, and there's a shift. Now, the markers in the shift, and first of all, to kind of understand that phenomena. So I went into that nonverbal state and putting my hands in body in a certain position, and images began to populate the space, and then sounds. And then those images and sounds had a correlation, meaning I could see my mother's signature in those sounds, meaning my earlier childhood memories. That sounds, that feels, that looks like mother, right? And so, so that resonates, there's a correlation. So then I allow the body to go into what it's doing, and I grasp that I don't know what's going on. And so there's a part of me that wants to snap out of it, right? But I don't know where to go if I snap out of it, right? If I just say something happened there, I don't know where to go, that's not very useful to me or to you. So then the question becomes like, well, what's the worst case that can happen, right? I can just be there asleep in that position for what, an hour, 2 hours? I mean, and then I obviously would delete that bit out, right? So that all goes through my mind and say, well, this is ultimately about me, meaning if I can actually have a shift or learn something myself, that's more useful, right, to me than just teaching you. And so that's the permission to go into the state and just be there. And after what seems to me like very little time, there's a yellow light and a sense of lifting my head up again, right? And there's an awakening, a shift in energy. My eyes start to blink, and here we are, right? So that's a shift. There's a shift in physical state. There's a shift in emotional, energetic state. There's a shift in the body. And that identity is shifted to what? To what? Well, I would say there's more gratitude. If I look and scan the difference, I have more gratitude. I'm breathing deeper. My eyes ache a little bit in this area. There's some pressure. And so that could be another place to go, right? But this is an experiential, this is a physiological, experiential shift, right? I'm going down again, so let's go with that. Some more sleep-like, slow state, breathing more shallowly and more stilly. I'm seeing anger more in me now, more red. I'm seeing a red and gold band. There's a red crescent shape right around here. My eyes, there's an image of kind of a demon hatred, like the kind of hatred you'd think of just kind of an intense physiological hatred. So there's red. Now that shifting to orange and brown and light. My head is lifting again. And the band is lowering and turning into kind of a copper necklace. And I'm seeing myself as a tribal woman. Now I'm seeing an actress who is an African-American tribal woman. And I'm feeling the shame and indignity of sexual violation. and humiliation. Letting something come out of my mouth. Letting my eyes blink. Letting my eyes get lighter. There's still a lid on my eyes in terms of they're lighter, but it's not lifting up. The breath is still heavy around this particular thing. Now I look at that actress more as an external. So I'm seeing her angry, indignant face, and I don't want to meet her eyes because I feel well, she's looking at the world as if it has done her wrong, and she's angry, and she's and so there's a part of me that takes that on and feels that I'm part of what she's angry at. And so that's a small child, emotionally, that realizes I'm part of the world. She is angry at the world. And so that's a very heavy, trance-like, feels almost as if I'm giving birth. With the breath, I become more of her anger and more of her rhythm. So I merge with that one. If I look at her through my spirit eyes, I see her with love. I see her with appreciation. I see her, I'm proud of her. I'm happy to be there. But there's a part of me that's that's in the lower base of the head that takes it on, that feels like whatever it is she's angry at, that's me. And then there's a bit of cream, yellow, vanilla kind of energy up here that just accepts and loves her as she is. And physiologically, it's hard for me to make the connection. And it's more comfortable to look down, to be ashamed, and to feel that the indignation, the rage. And I think it's very linked with African American injustice. She is an African American woman. If I try and put that rage and indignation into voice, I kind of hear Martin Luther King talking. And Yeah, so that's some of the matrix. I feel spite in this area. So I feel some of the anger and spite. The animal is like a jackal, an angry dog, snarling dog. There's rage. There's banging of drums, pumping fists, so that it goes into that. And the eyes are covered in red. And it occurs to me that I've gotten lost in the healing, meaning there's letting something come into awareness and release, and there's also becoming an identity, donning a mask. And so in this case, I'm more in the role of donning a mask, which is both waking up and going to sleep, right? Because I'm now more in waking consciousness of daily life, and I'm more in the mask, in the identity. I've identified with more of that anger, more of that purpose, more of that, the beating of the drums for injustice, the seeking of revenge. And so there's a waking up into that normal state of consciousness and a going to sleep in the shape of an identity. And if we don't judge it, like, so now I can look you in the eye. If we don't judge it, if we say that there is a movement from the frozen identity of trauma and shock, of abuse, to the shame and to seeing and being perceived as the source of the shock, letting that woman be external and looking towards me, and then becoming the angry one that was traumatized, that is protecting the wound. This is the evolution of the psyche, right? The traumatized, ignored fetus, the traumatized and ignored child, moves into the anger of the adolescent and the blame and the righteousness against the world, which, if we own that we are a part of the world, is met with shame. Like, I acknowledge that part of me is not perfect, that part of me did this to you. I feel ashamed. And then the anger, right? The drumbeat, the anger. The call for justice, the call for change, right? That is a dynamic movement, and it's also, there's a sense of empowerment, meaning it's got structure, it's a new identity. So beginning the identity as the helpless infant, we emerge into the activist energy, the protest energy, right? The staccato energy that demands change now, right? That topples leaders, right? that topples power structures, that breaks down systems. Right? All systems are identity systems. Right? So we've just looked at several identity systems, the identity of the helpless infant, the identity of the one who is ashamed to be inadequate in the eyes of blame, in the eyes of rage, right? Because the eyes of blame, the eyes of rage, the injustice, the hatred of that African American woman, they accuse the world of being inadequate. They show disgust at the status quo, right? So the message of blame, of disgust, of contempt is a message that you, the world, is inadequate. You didn't prevent my rape. You didn't stand by my child. You didn't honor me as I deserve to be honored. Right? It's a silent rage of contempt. Now that's a very broad, sweeping gaze, right? And so looking out and looking at that gaze, I am part of the world that provided an inadequate response to that woman. And that moves, right? That moves to not being able to fully respond to that woman, right? Because there is a love, there is a kindness, there is a moving towards that can love that woman, but I'm taking on the shame. Meaning I'm looking and saying that's me that isn't good enough. And that shame prevents me from fully loving that woman. Right? So then I become the woman. Now I'm angry, I'm pissed. Right? So it goes from I'm not good enough for her to the world isn't good enough for me, right? I want change. Right? Down with the assholes, right? That's now I enter that identity and can awaken in that. Now, energy is very much like plumbing. So if you imagine a plumbing pipe that divides into, various points, you have a certain amount of pressure, let's say 60 psi. Let's say it's 5 gallon per minute. 5 gallon per minute at 60 psi. And so if all of these pipes are 1 inch and they're all level, you'll have an equal amount of water pouring out of these pipes, right? And where I'm going with this is I want to shed light on why the shame that blocked the energy of being able to connect with and love this woman moves the energy into becoming the one that is filled with blame, right? So water's coming out, and as someone that works with water and physiology and understands that reality is fractal, I mean, reality is always trying to show us reality. And so it repeats itself in nested fractals and patterns that are similar in many, many, many areas of life. So we look at a roll of toilet paper. we can understand aspects of the psyche, right? Because they're not completely different worlds, right? The physical world is a denser embodiment of the mental emotional world, right? So the patterns and principles are similar. They're just denser, right? And so we can learn about the inner world from the outer world. We can learn about the outer world from the inner world. But if I cut off this pipe here or block it 30% with guilt or fear, and I block this one 30%, now you have 20% more water coming out of these pipes. If I block this one, you actually have 40% more water. Now you have, again, more water coming out of the remaining pipes. They shoot up higher. And if I block this one, this pipe shoots water with 5 times the force, right? As if all these blocks were open. If this opens, then suddenly these share the load, right? Now you have 2 pipes, right? So when we suppress something with guilt, with shame, with fear, etc., it moves, it pressurizes another area. And if we seal off all energy, right, it starts putting strain on the system, on the piping system. So if there's a leak, if there's a small leak, for example, here, and you turn off all the valves and maintain the pressure, the leak will become bigger. It'll start spraying out, right? Because the system is pressurized. And there's a certain amount of pressure when the system will burst and just water will just start spewing out anywhere. Because water energy is looking to flow and is looking to take the path of least resistance. And that's defined by the environment, the mental environment, the emotional environment, the cultural environment, the logistical environment, right? You know, so it seems to me like blocking off, and not all, some systems, are different, but it seems to me that by blocking off the energy of loving and connecting with the woman in her contempt and in her rage, the energy flowed from that possibility or probability into becoming her. And there wasn't a block to becoming her. So in that sense, what we're perhaps dealing with is the checks and balances of morality, which is culturally defined. So we're dealing with a cultural mechanism. So there was a part in me that just wants to love and connect with that woman. And then that ends happily ever after, right? Because that's what she's not getting. She's not getting that love from herself and from the cult and from her abuser. She's not getting it. So if I give that to her, if I give her light, she stops having contempt. She stops blaming because someone is loving her. Someone is accepting her as she is, understanding her as she is, validating her, bonding with her. And so that melts into an embrace. But my shame, based on the belief that I'm a bad person, based on a variety of different messages and things, stopped that. So then I move into the angry drumbeat that she has to moving her agenda, right, forward. her sense of injustice and revenge and all of that. And so that's where that moves. And then because that's clear and because I don't judge that, like when I think of her taking revenge for all of her injustice, I don't block that energy. So that one can flow in me. And so then I join the agenda that isn't blocked. But I block the love, etc., because of a deep-seated shame of inadequacy, right? So my mother gave me that deep sense of inadequacy, that I wasn't good enough, right? And so I lack the courage or impulse to approach someone in a state of contempt and rage towards men. I lack the courage, the empathy to approach her in that state. So that gets pushed down. And then it fountains up as I become her. And don't block that. And a shift in identity, a shift in thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, being occurs. And that's what then wakes up and comes out into the world. Right? So what are the languages here? Well, we've got imagination, pivotal. We've got physiological sensation. We've got trust in the process. We've got lack of judgment in the sense that if I judged any part of the process, beginning with, the first judgment was my hat, right? That's I have two hats, and it's always because I don't like dealing with my hair. And so that's the first judgment. And the anxiety is like, what are they going to do with my hat? What are they going to make that into, right? That's the fear, right? So if that fear stops me, they're going to think I'm vain, or they're going to, who knows what connotations this hat style and stuff has for people, or whatever it is, right? Or if I don't want to comb my hair and I don't want to deal with your judgments about my hat, then that stops the process, right? There's so many things along the way that can stop the process, right? But this exploration of identity comes because there's an impulse to explore what is an ineffable and perhaps the most important science in the world. As human beings appear to be the dominant species on the planet today, and are having more impact on the planet than any other species, our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is the most important science to explore in understanding and in creating the future for the next 1,000 years. The science or the lack of science, the competency or the incompetency with which we approach and navigate identity is the competency or incompetency with which we create our future.